Day 26 of the Middle East escalation, and there are still no signs of de-escalation from the US, the Zionist entity, or Iran. From intensifying missile strikes and growing threats around the Strait of Hormuz to urgent international efforts for peace and diplomacy, the world is watching closely as Iran, the US, and their regional partners navigate this high-stakes confrontation. Tonight, we'll break down the latest military escalations, explore the conditions for a potential ceasefire, and examine what the newest diplomatic moves from Cairo, Rome, and beyond mean for global stability. Now let's bring in our guests to break this down. Mr. Ihsan Al-Khatib, scholar and legal professional, as well as Associate Professor of Political Science, is joining us from Washington, D.C. via Teams. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Mr. Greg Simons, also Professor of Journalism at Daffodil International University, is joining us live from Dhaka via Teams as well. Thank you. And also we're having with us tonight in the studio Dr. Abdenour Toumi, geopolitical analyst. Thank you for being here with us tonight.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on the program.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we're going to start with the military escalation. On the ground and at sea. So Iran's army said Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier will be targeted if it comes within missile range. They also claimed they have done that. Meanwhile, Russia is evacuating staff from Iran's Bushehr nuclear plant. Iraq has summoned the U.S. chargé d'affaires over attacks on its military units. And the White House warns that if Iran refuses to accept defeat, Washington will hit harder. Perhaps starting with you, Mr. Al-Khatib. From a political and strategic standpoint, how serious is this escalation, and are we looking at localized confrontations, or is this a real risk of a wider regional war?
There is no risk of a wide war. The Iranians have tried to make it into something bigger than it is. I mean, the bottom line is a conflict between Iran and Israel and the US, and the Iranians have chosen the conflict. Trump tried to reach an agreement with them, but they wanted to basically challenge him, and they dared them to attack. The negotiations ended with the Iranians telling the Americans that they have 200 kilograms of enriched uraniums or even more, and saying that they can make a number of nuclear weapons if they choose. That's how it ended. And then the Iranians wanted to involve other people in their problem, so they started hitting the neighboring countries, trying to drag them into the fight, but they wisely stayed out of it. And then they tried to choke the international economy and have others pay for their decision to confront the US and Israel by disrupting the shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. So they tried to make others get involved or pay a price for their decision, but so far they have failed at it. And now Trump is still looking at the possibility of reaching some kind of agreement with them. And if he doesn't, he is in the position to inflict on them more massive losses. Hopefully, they will come to their senses and reach an agreement, but it seems unlikely.
Mr. Toumi, perhaps what is your take on that?
Actually, as the war, this unjust and illegal war and this act of aggression from the US and the Zionist entity on Iran enters its fifth week. Having said that, this illegal war was marketed to the, first of all, American public opinion and the media, so that to the US allies, notably in the region, in the Gulf countries, for instance, and in Europe, it's going to be that how President Donald Trump did market this war that is going to be short. And I'm paraphrasing, and the President Donald Trump, he dared even to use the term excursion. But the war, the dynamic of the war has been going on now for 5 weeks. As a result, it was no end game to this war, and this is why now we are in this, particularly this 48, the coming 48 hours or 72 hours are going to be crucial in the dynamic of this war, because you use the word escalation and de-escalation. So now the Americans are trying to de-escalate of the war as a result of the repercussions, the direct repercussions of the war that has turned into an energy war, and that how the Americans are suffering a great deal from these no strategy and no goals of this war. But which is very interesting, has happened in the last 48 hours exactly. In the beginning of the war, when this war started, it was the Zionist entity prime minister war. Now, because he himself also, and he did, how he portrayed to his public opinion inside of the entity, Zionist entity and media, that is going to be short. And then he tried, even, I mean, he succeeded to some extent to convince the American president, Mr. Donald Trump, that it's going to be short and let's go and bomb. And they started after the assassination of the Iranian leadership, but they didn't actually, the Iranians did absorb that, the shock and awe, but then they survived the shock. Now they are in the new dynamic of the conflicts, because now the Iranians are still have the upper hand in this war, and
the war that they did not start.
Exactly, the war, actually, as the Iranians say, and it is legitimate. I mean, the war has imposed on them, and they were actually, it was an act of aggression, and it's an illegal war according to international law. But the Iranians now, since they survived that first week or 10 days of the shock and awe, now they are in that new, actually was a shift in that dynamic of they know how to resist to and go into the resolution. Having said that, the equation of deterrence now has clashed with attrition, and this is why it has pushed the Americans now to look for, quote-unquote, an exit strategy, and this is why now they are having these initiatives via third parties.
Mediation, we will talk about perhaps mediation, that's a very important point, especially today. Maybe back to you, Mr. Simons. We have seen Iran's Revolutionary Guard announcing that they have launched the 81st wave of True Promise 4 operations, striking areas across occupied Palestinian territories with multiple types. At the same time, the U.S. is sending the 82nd Airborne paratroopers, more Marines, and thousands of sailors to the region. How do you see all of these ongoing strikes and escalation, if we can call that so?
Yeah, well, it's the US and Israel that are constantly escalating because, as your previous speaker just noted, they have tried all kinds of things which have so far failed. And so Trump, being the kind of person that he is unable to admit defeat. He's unable to admit the realities of this war, which is not going his way. So therefore, to use Trump's expression, he does not have the cards. So what does he do when he does not have the cards? He lies, cheats, deceives, and he pretends he has the cards. Okay, you have the 82nd Airborne Division, which is it's going on reputation. In a division, you have approximately between 10 to 15,000 soldiers. These are not with heavy weapons. They're not with support, artillery support. What are they going to do with them? They're going to drop them into territory which is massive where they're not going to be supported, and against an IRGC which has at least 1 million men at arms plus militias, or you're going to send, what is it? They're saying something like 4.5, or sometimes it varies, 1,000 Marines. I mean, this is going to make Gallipoli look like a Sunday picnic. These guys, if they get landed, I mean, this obsession, for example, threatening Harig Island. How they're going to get to Harig Island with an amphibious invasion force? You have to go past the Straits of Hormuz. Good luck with that. I mean, you're going to sail past with ships past these anti-ship weapons, the missiles, these different drones, whatever else they have there. I mean, there's a lot of bluster, there is a lot of bluff. But if you know slight thing about military tactics and the likely result, this is just playing. They've tried to play a psychological game, but Trump, shall we say, is famous for avoiding any kind of military consequences. Because if we remember, back during the Vietnam War, he spent his whole time avoiding any kind of military draft because of his alleged bone spurs. Now he's, because of his ego, because of his narcissism, he is threatening to send troops to their certain deaths based on what exactly? It's an illegal war of choice by Israel and the US again. A second time that they've attacked under the cover of diplomatic negotiations. For Iran, this is an extentitial war, and it has been one which has been ongoing since the 1979 revolution. Because if we look at this, I mean, you had Operation Eagle Claw, which was an absolute disaster. That was when Iran was only formed. I mean, the US killed their own troops without any military engagement.
Understood.
And, yeah.
Thank you.
And I mean,
yes?
yeah, finally, I would say that Iran still remembers the 1980 to 89 Iran war, which was imposed on them when they supplied Iraq and Saddam Hussein with all kinds of weapons, including chemical weapons, to try and destroy the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Now maybe speaking about calls for peace, turning to diplomacy. Gentlemen, President Tebboune stresses an immediate halt to all escalation. Egypt says it's ready to host talks just today and is pushing for a direct US-Iran meeting as a last chance to avoid a war. Turkey, China, Qatar, and Pakistan have all urged de-escalation. We've seen also the UN Secretary General Guterres warning the conflict is out of control and the world is staring down the barrel of a wider war, in his words. Perhaps, Mr. Toumi, with so many countries pushing for negotiations, also pushing for mediation, can these efforts realistically prevent further escalation, or the war is already slipping beyond control?
This is, and unfortunately, if it continues, it will spill over and will create more chaos, because it's already, speaking of energy and how this, it's the long of those, I mean, Western and even Asians, and even in the regions are impacted a great deal about this war. And this was actually the not having actually even a strategy to start this war, and having that rationality that started with, as I said earlier, it was the Zionist entity prime minister approach and goal, and his dream also was, hoping to change the Middle East
The map
and
of the region.
and also having like no threat at all, and to for him is to continue and eating up the territories in the region and having no adversary. So this is why, I mean, his goal was to go not for regime change or regime collapse. I mean, he doesn't care about that because they don't. I mean, we have this experience with Iraq, and we had this experience with Afghanistan as well. How the newcomers at that time did sell the war in Afghanistan and Iraq about regime change and bring democracy or free the people. On this war, particularly, especially the report of the New York Times, I believe in two days ago, and how was actually going and creating chaos and instability and disorder in the Iranian society. So this is, I mean, you don't have to be an expert in political science on geopolitics. It's too simple. It's not about go and to free the people. You are waging war on those people. So this is why now, as you said, so the regional powers and international powers, and particularly the leaders in the region, in which they were very anxious in the beginning of this war, like during the negotiation process, it was a ray of hope at that time that maybe they can break through and will avoid this catastrophe. So now they know it is in a no return point, because they know if this spillover will be an apocalyptic consequences. So this is why we see now, you mentioned countries like Egypt, Turkey, even Algeria is playing a major role in shadow diplomacy. And Pakistan is taking the lead, so there is this possibility for discussions. I mean, it's too early to speak about negotiations because we are not there yet, but at least to build up this sense of discussions. But what is interesting in those discussions or talks is a key element here is the trust, in which is totally absent, because the Iranians, they don't trust the Americans. Because now this war has become Donald Trump's war. It's no longer the Zionist entity prime minister's war. Because now, and the Iranians, I mean, it is a fair and legitimate point when they lost their trust, because they started with Obama deal about the nuclear program in 2015, and then President Donald Trump, I mean, he did withdraw from this deal in 2018 in his first term, and then just last summer when they attacked Iran in middle of negotiations, so that to the latest, just a couple of weeks ago, when there were those talks under the auspice of Oman, who played a major role to bring the two parties together for indirect talks, and there was the meetings in Geneva and in Muscat. As a result, the Iranians, they got hit again and attacked. So this is why now we see this, actually the bar is too high. Now both parties, Americans and Iranians now, are trying to put the bar too high in order to go for further discussions to break through for this. Actually, it is still an impasse right now, and it is too early to speak about negotiations. On the other hand, it is an imperative for international actors to lead, and in order to stop the catastrophic consequences that will be originated from this war.
Mr. Simons, perhaps, do you see the efforts of mediation and the calls for halting the escalation as effective, or is the focus still yet on the military escalation on the ground?
It's still military escalation at this stage, because why would you trust the United States? They've already proven themselves absolutely untrustworthy. They keep on attacking under the cover of diplomatic negotiations. If they talk about diplomatic negotiations again, I mean, the first thought that will come to mind, they're getting ready for a sneak attack. And it should be remembered that according to international law, attacking under the cover of diplomatic negotiations is actually illegal. It's called perfidy. And they've done this twice. I mean, there's no way you trust them, especially a snake oil salesman like Trump. And I mean, you just see his mental condition unraveling. Would you want negotiations with that? One moment he says he's won the war. The next minute he's berating the NATO lackeys for not coming and helping him dig him out of the problem which he's created for himself. He's unhinged. And he's unhinged because he's out of his depth. This is out of his control. This is not a cast on The Apprentice where he is calling the shots. He's at the stage now where he's reacting, but the nature of his personal character means that he cannot accept and do things decently and gracefully and according to international law. He has to try and double down. I find it interesting, though, because I think it was yesterday or the day before, he laid the blame for the beginning of the second illegal war on Pete Hegseth. He says he's the one who suggested it. So, I mean, how can you negotiate with someone as mentally unstable as that and has a track record of being dishonest and disingenuous? And I mean, as far as Iran is concerned, and I think they're right, this is an attritional war now, not only on the battlefield, but economically as well. And it's the United States that's going to be hurting. I mean, you can already see some political effects. I mean, one of Trump's, one of the Democrats recently flipped one of his areas in his home state. So looking at that, it does not bode well for him. He might, in the short term, be able to manipulate markets by saying that he's having imaginary negotiations with Iranians who he cannot and will not name to try and bring down the price of oil in the very short term. But if you do that too many times, not even the market is going to believe him. So, there is no possibility for any kind of meaningful negotiations while this goes on. Also, I mean, what hasn't been said here, every time there appears to be something which is moving in that direction, Netanyahu and the Zionist entity go and attack some kind of critical infrastructure. I mean, the past gas fields, for example, Trump said, he forbade that, but I mean, he's forbade many things. I think this is just theatre. It's out of his control, and increasingly he is losing mental control, and with
control in your words. Maybe let's have Mr. Toomey's take on that, since you brought up the unpopularity of the war among Americans themselves. Mr. Toomey, polling cited today shows a majority of Americans think the military action has gone too far. Even as the administration doubles down militarily, we're seeing them putting more efforts, more means to take over. Could domestic opinion in the US become a more important constraint on the war than battlefield developments themselves?
Actually, it's not only on the battlefield. I mean, the battlefield, as the guest stated, it is already a war of attrition.
Yes.
And the time is playing in favor for the Iranians. Now, it is a pocket issue, and what I mean by that, it's about the power of purchase for the Americans. And one has to remember, President Donald Trump, when he was elected in his second term, I mean, his slogan was "Make America Great Again" and "America First," meaning by that to be more isolationist. And he will, as he said, he will end all the wars, and particularly he will withdraw all the troops from the Middle East, and looking for a prosperous, stable Middle East. As a result, and a half later. So what went wrong? We don't know. But today, the Americans are asking this question, and the Americans are asking this question, not only his base, not only in mega base, it is the Democrats, of course. I mean, they were against this war from the beginning. So this is why when we see now the polls of 60% who are against this war, I mean, and President Donald Trump is heading in next November to midterm elections. And this, if it continues like this, I'm sure, I mean, he has already lost popularity, and even his base and his contingencies, congressmen, women, and senators are already anxious, I mean, who will have or put their seat for election or re-elections next November. It's going to be very challenging. As a result, is President Donald Trump, I mean, who looks and who has this like a huge public relation image vis-a-vis his legacy. He's putting his legacy at risk. And this is why now we saw, I mean, there is this, he's talking about negotiations. I mean, actually, he mentions or discussions to end this war, because sure, I mean, from April, let's say, to November, it's a long time, it's a lifetime in politics. Anything could happen. But this has already damaged his legacy. And even his base now are anxious and nervous about that. And one has to remember last week, I believe, the resignation of his counterterrorism, domestic counterterrorism director, Mr. Joe Kent, who did resign because he saw this war is going nowhere. And Iran didn't pose any threat, and this preemptive action, it's not America's or his, actually, President Donald Trump's foreign policy determinant. It is the newcomers determinant, and interestingly enough, there was this diversion or these discussions between, I mean, when he was shaping his administration in terms of his foreign policy vis-a-vis the Middle East, he was actually taking away all these the neocons doctrine and trying to have his own doctrine based on I guess prosperity and stability. Have been said that a peacemaker or a businessman, and going with that up because it's his background that where he excelled. So he thought he could go and bring peace and stability in the Middle East. So as a result, he created more chaos in the Middle East, and now we don't know where the region is heading, because again, there is no more Middle East of the February 28. Now we are in a new Middle East, not the new Middle East that will be designed by the Zionist entity prime minister, but by the region's actors. Iran is part of them, because one has to remember Iran is a part of the region. Yes. And the Gulf countries, and even countries like Turkey, Egypt, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Maybe let's try to break down the official positions of Iran and the US. Again, Iran has not yet responded positively to the US 15-point peace plan. They actually rejected it. Tehran demands recognition of its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, guaranteed compensation for war damage, and the end of attacks and assassinations. Arakchi, Iran's foreign minister, told neighboring countries to distance themselves from the US, while insisting Iran is not seeking war but wants a permanent end to the conflict. The White House, meanwhile, is pressing for Iran to accept defeat or face a harder strike. Mr. Simons, how do we understand all of these circumstances, and how is the messaging from both Iran and Washington affecting public opinion and also international diplomacy?
It's interesting you say that, because you can see it unraveling. I mean, we saw on live TV where you had former CIA director Brennan. He said that he trusts Iran more than he trusts Donald Trump. He said that on a live TV interview. You saw a retired French general who has criticized the Americans and he said Donald Trump can go and F himself because he caused the situation, so he should get himself out of it and not demand his vassal states to do it for him. There is also, I mean, yesterday you had the German president who criticized the United States for their breach of international law in waging this war, unprovoked war of aggression against Iran. So you can see all of these coming out. So Iran holds the moral high ground here. They were attacked. They are the victim. They are not the perpetrator in this case. And Trump is just trying to look tough. He's trying to talk big, but he contradicts himself. He contradicts himself several times in one short speech. This is desperation. I mean, why? I mean, you talk about the 15-point so-called peace plan. That's nothing to do with peace. It's to do with capitulation. Iran is not Iran just needs to survive this. They don't need to win it in order to have a victory in this second war. I mean, this has been the case with a number of these American wars of aggression. So looking at this, I mean, Iran's response is absolutely understandable. Why would you give up your strategic missiles? I mean, this is the thing which is defending themselves with. I mean, if they give them up, Iran will end up like Syria or Lebanon, just bombed and occupied at will. So there is a lot of desperate, fanciful and wishful thinking by Trump. But Iran is the one who is now calling the shots. I mean, this has a similar tone, but in a much more dramatic fashion, what we see with the Ukraine war, where Trump is trying to pretend he's this party trying to bring an end to it. But like with that, the US is no longer calling the shots. It has started something which it can no longer control, but they pretend they're still in control.
Okay. Mr. Toomey, Iran has now rejected the U.S. plan for the ceasefire framework. They said they're negotiating with themselves and sent back its own counter-proposal with their conditions. I mentioned that they had the conditions of including reparations, an end to the killings of their officials, and Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Does this show that Tehran is no longer negotiating over de-escalation alone, but over the political terms of the post-war order?
Actually, and the Iranians now, since they survived that shock of the first days of the aggression, and now to the contrary, so the quote-unquote, the aim of this goal or the objectives of this war was regime change or regime collapse, and decapitate for good the leadership of the Islamic Republic. As a result, now we are entering the fifth week, 4 weeks later, so they get leadership is more radicalized than they were negotiating, and they started to talk with not in 2025 or 2024, actually in 2000, 26 years ago, when they started about the Iranian nuclear program, in which led to the Obama's administration that broke a deal with them in 2015. And that was rationality of course, the basic negotiations between Tehran and Washington. Consequently, President Donald Trump's first administration, he did withdraw from that deal. And now we are talking about this negotiation. There are no negotiations talk. There are this approach of discussions, trying to break through, to have something we can talk about. But this time, Iran is not going to give an inch about its position because it has become more radicalized on one hand. On the other hand, as I said, they don't have again, any trust in the, particularly this administration, President Donald Trump's administration, because they were betrayed twice in just a couple of months. So this is why now a third party mediator could play a role to bring them together. And this is why we are hearing in shadow diplomacy about countries like Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, Oman is still strong, Qatar also. But this is why I think the Pakistanis, they know well, because it's a nuclear power in a nuclear country in the region and has close ties and excellent relations with both countries, with Tehran and Washington. And also to sum up all this, and again, maybe you can talk about that, it's about the international community in which is totally absent. And by the way, the international community has collapsed with international legality. So these are members, like for instance, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, of President Donald Trump border of peace. So this could, give him this sense that we'll have a possibility to break through for the Iranians in order to start discussions.
So, Mr. Toomey, you're talking about the international community and the efforts to end the war. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres today said the war has gone beyond limits leaders thought imaginable and appointed a personal envoy, while UN rights bodies are moving toward urgent debate. So, in your opinion, we're reaching a point where international institutions can no longer just monitor the war and are just being forced politically to intervene?
Unfortunately, it's the case. And we saw the role of the UN that has failed miserably, whether in the Ukrainian conflict, in the ongoing genocidal war in Gaza, and to this illegal war. So the UN now what is doing is just a humanitarian action, or the least they can do right now. They are not powerful. This is why, again, it's a part of the truth of this political disorder, or international disorder. When I spoke about the Board of Peace that was established by President Trump, in which it is pretty much like a country club membership. So this is why today the international committee that will be led by countries like we mentioned, regional countries such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, other Gulf countries, and Turkey, Pakistan, and other Azerbaijan, and even Egypt and Algeria, who has that voice. Particularly Algeria has that peace diplomacy and played, and in its legacy, has that rich experience in terms of mediation and also speaking about trust. So Algeria can or could position itself in this posture because it has excellent relations with both Iran and Washington. So this is why now the ramification of this conflict is already spilled over. It's not only in the Gulf countries now, its consequences now are reaching already the US, Europe, Asia,
global
and even it is global. It has become a global issue. And unfortunately for Secretary Guterres, he's doing what he can do. The least thing is just to condemn. And sadly to say that I'm afraid that the UN will have the fate of the League of Nations.
Mr. Greg Simons, maybe your take on that. So the international institutions are perhaps not able to stop this at this point?
No, they're completely incapable, and they're proved incapable. In fact, if we remember at the beginning of it, they came up with a resolution that condemned Iran for defending itself. So that shows you the level which the UN is at. If we also remember, where was the UN when Trump illegally attacked Venezuela and kidnapped Maduro? They're absolutely missing in any of these conflicts. They're toothless. As is just noted, this is looking like the League of Nations just before the opening of the Second World War, where you had this toothless organization that was just doing some kind of symbolic political rhetoric but with no effect. So, I mean, this is the way it seems to be going, especially when you have the likes of the Zionist entity and United States under Trump, which are absolutely violating all codes of international law and ethical practice. I mean, if we remember back, I mean, not so long ago, when on the first day when they bombed elementary schoolgirls and killed close to 170 of them, and then tried to blame Iran for killing those schoolgirls. You've got this Hegseth who has these very supremacist tattoos on him, and you're listening to these US officials that talk about raining death and destruction and all of this rhetoric about this collective punishment
Mr. Simons,
of all Iranian people.
Speaking about their statements and the U.S. position and everything we're hearing from the U.S. Side, the White House said today it refused to say whether reopening the Strait of Hormuz might require U.S. boots on the ground if talks fail. Does that silence itself suggest Washington is preparing perhaps for a scenario it does not yet want to admit publicly?
This is quite likely because, I mean, Trump has lied about everything he stood for. I mean, we've gone from being a so-called peace president to a full-time war president who's committing war crimes on a daily basis. And yeah, I mean, US is a maritime and an air power, and Iran is a continental power, it's a land power. To force Iran, they're going to need to use their horrible expression, boots on the ground. If you go by military doctrine and convention, an invasion would require a 3-to-1 numerical superiority by the attacking side. So the IRGC has at least 1 million men at arms, which would mean a minimum invasion force of 3 million soldiers. And the US doesn't have that. So if we're talking about this, it would be a disaster. And I mean, just look at the motivation. This is the pure physics of it. But if you go into the psychology, you have US troops who are saying this is Israel's war. This is the Epstein Fury, the Operation Epstein Fury. It's not Operation Epic Fury. You've got Iranians that are defending their homeland. They're defending their way of life. Their belief and trust in the political and military leadership is there, which is absent with the US and increasingly Israel, because, excuse me, I mean, you see the scenes in Tel Aviv. I mean, they are blocked from leaving Israel by air. They're crowding on board ships. The Israeli cities are getting pounded at will. So this is not going well. It's just a matter of time when the next stupid, ill-conceived card is going to be played by people. Netanyahu and Trump are alike in this case. They are narcissists, and they have their own interests first, their own ego, their own. It's Trump first and Netanyahu first. It's nothing to do with the countries they theoretically represent.
Mm-hmm. Finally, maybe the Strait of Hormuz, it's a vital artery for global oil and gas. UN-Chief Guterres again warns that prolonged closure is choking the movement of essential commodities at a critical planting season. France's army chief is coordinating with other militaries to restore maritime navigation, while Iraqi energy officials warn of further oil production cuts if disruptions continue. Maybe to you, Mr. Abdunnoor, to me, how serious is the threat of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is to global energy supply, and how could we see a wider economic ripple effect if the strait remains partially closed, because it is not fully closed?
Actually, it is, and its repercussions are already on the field, and people are experiencing that, notably in the US and Asian countries, and in Europe. And just a simple example of for the rise of the fuel and how the prices have gone up high, and it hits directly the pocket of the voters, whether in France or in the UK or in Germany, for us, or in Italy at this point, and in the US. But this is why, again, the next 48 hours are going to be crucial to break through or to make an end to this war. But making an end to this war from the Iranians' perspective and from the Iranians' view at this point, they don't want to have a peace agreement like they were, like for instance, the Zionist entity agreed on with the Palestinian resistance and ended the call for a truce, and then they took what they wanted to get, and they again went back and destroyed the Palestinians. They did the same thing with the Hezbollah in 2024, and they agreed on a truce agreement, and then they violated this agreement 1,000 times, and then incursions and going occupying mainly the south of Lebanon. And this is, it is war now in Lebanon, and this is this illegal aggression on the Lebanon's sovereignty. So this is why the Iranians are insisting on, like you stated in their 5 points
Conditions.
Agreements. First of all, the assassinations has to be harder, and also we need a serious peace agreement if there is one, and this is why is making the U.S. President's anxious and a little bit nervous about this, because he needs a lot of time and he needs how to break through, because from his side he's not thinking strategically, he's looking for tactic, taking it from his business background. But the Iranians are talking about this and thinking strategically, because they know, and now they have a solid card and a wild card in their hands, is the Hormuz Strait.
So the cards are in the Hormuz Strait. Maybe, Mr. Simons, can international military coordination realistically secure the Hormuz Strait, or are we looking at a long-term regional impasse? Is there no exit from this war?
There is an exit, but Trump needs to back down, and Netanyahu need to back down from the illegal, unprovoked war of aggression against Iran. And they will not do so for the reasons I've outlined. I mean, you can see that Trump has threatened, he's ridiculed, he has belittled his allies, including NATO, and all of them, even his most ardent lackeys, have said, no, we want nothing to do with it. I mean, on a funny aside, the only country that has offered any kind of military assistance has been Estonia, a country of 1.2 million in the Baltic Sea, which have sent 17 messages to the United States of the offer of, I don't know what kind of military assistance, which have all been ignored, which is understandable, because, I mean, the Strait of Hormuz, you can see some parallels to the Strait of Hormuz in its current form with what the Gallipoli and the Dardanelles presented to the British and French and Russian Empire in the First World War. You had a vast kind of maritime force assembled, and they used boots on the ground, for that uncouth expression, but they were unable to force it. And this is the case here, but the missile technology, they're not going to get anywhere close to it, which is why you have the Gerald Ford withdrawn and going back for repairs, which will probably take years. This is why the fleet is well off the coast. And Yeah, I mean, this requires common sense and a realistic understanding of the realities on the ground. Both Israel and the United States at this stage are incapable of conceiving that. The only one able to conceive that is Iran, and they understand the value of the Straits of Hormuz.
Mr. Toomey, Egypt said today there is no winning party in this dangerous escalation, while Iran says it will end the war only on its own terms. Are we moving into a phase where diplomacy is actually no longer about compromise, but about which side can define what victory means?
At this stage, yes, particularly from the Iranian side, because they know, as I said, they have this wild card in their hands, particularly the Strait of Hormuz, and they know how to manage that. And I mean, they're putting pressure not only on the Gulf countries, but also on the European countries and the Asian countries and the US as well. And this is why now they are playing, and Iranians are excellent in chess. Actually, it's a chess game. And to sum up this, now has become a global chess game. This is why I said when President Donald Trump initiated these negotiation talks, we are far away from the negotiation team. We're in discussions. So he's thinking tactically, but the Iranians are thinking strategically. And the Egyptians, they know, because the consequences of this war will be terrible for the entire region, and it has become already, it is a global war. But what the Egyptians are trying to do with the Turks and the Pakistanis and the Arab countries, Gulf Arab countries in the region, is to at least stop the hemorrhage right now, and then push for the discussions, for talks, because it is an imperative. The region needs to have stability, because one has to remember the region has been in this chaos for decades, since the first Gulf War, 1980, 1988, and then to the second Gulf War, to the third Gulf War of the illegal invasion of Iraq, to this one. All of this is because of the messianic government extremists in the Zionist entity today, who has this crazy idea about the great Israel and so on. And speaking about peace, because the other side, they don't believe in peace. They already talk about security, but security for them, but insecurity for the region and instability for the region. We talk about normalization, it means for them it's capitulation. And this is why Iranians, especially now the IRGC, who are running the shot now, and they know well, because they have been in this dilemma for decades. And this is why, again, the team of President Donald Trump is going to be having a huge challenge. This is why there are these news reports that he's changing his team of negotiation. And I believe he's sending his vice president, Mr. Vance, to initiate the talks with the Iranians in order to break through and have this possibility of discussion that will lead to de-escalation.
Thank you, Mr. Toomey. Stay with us. Thank you, Mr. Greg Simons, for your time and also for your insights. And also, we extend our appreciation and thanks to Ihsan Al-Khatib. He was with us in the first few minutes of our show. But stay with us for another discussion, and that will be on Italy's Prime Minister visit to Algeria. Hello and welcome back to our special edition on Italy's Prime Minister visit to Algerian. So Giorgia Meloni was in Algiers on a work and friendship visit at a time of rising global energy tensions, renewed pressure on gas markets, and growing uncertainty over long-term supply. Yet this visit goes well beyond gas. Algiers and Rome are bound by a resilient partnership with 13 billion euros in trade in 2025 and growing cooperation under the Matei plan, where Algeria has become a central pillar, alongside coordination on migration and Mediterranean security. Earlier today, President Abdelmajid Tebboune reaffirmed Algeria's role as a reliable energy partner for Europe, while also calling for broader cooperation in renewable energy, hydrogen, agriculture, and innovation. What is unfolding in Algiers today is the consolidation of a long-term strategic partnership between the two historically connected nations. With our experts, we'll break down what this visit really means, and that's coming up next. Now let's bring in our guest to break all of this down. Mr. Abdenour Toumi, political analyst, is here with us to discuss all of this. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Also with us via Teams is Alessandro Scipioni, Italian journalist. Thank you for being with us.
Hello, thank you for having me. Buonasera.
Our pleasure. And perhaps before starting our discussion, let's listen and watch this report gathered by our colleague Marwa Braior.
For decades, relations between Algeria and Italy have stood as a model of cooperation, spanning political, security, and economic fields, particularly in energy, industry, and agriculture. Today, that partnership is entering a new phase. No longer limited to traditional cooperation, Algiers and Rome are advancing toward a structured and permanent strategic dialogue crowned by the fourth session held recently in the Algerian capital. This growing dynamic reflects sustained high-level engagement, with repeated exchanges between President Abdelmajid Tebboune and his Italian counterpart Sergio Mattarella, confirming a shared political will to elevate bilateral relations. The acceleration comes amid a volatile geopolitical environment marked by escalating tensions in the Middle East. In this context, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's visit to Algeria provides an opportunity to assess progress on strategic projects across energy, agriculture, and investment, while expanding cooperation in counter-terrorism and defense. Military ties have also gained momentum, notably following the 2024 visit of Algeria's Chief of Staff, General Said Shingriha, to Italy, with both sides describing cooperation as reaching an advanced level. Beyond economic and security dimensions, Algeria and Italy maintain convergent positions on key regional issues, which include the Sahel, the Middle East tensions, the need for a just solution to the Palestinian cause, as well as support for a fair resolution to the Western Sahara issue in line with UN resolutions. Both countries also align on the need to reach a political solution to the Libyan crisis, preserving Libya's unity and preventing further instability. A strategic partnership that continues to evolve at a time of deep geopolitical uncertainty.
Without further ado, let's get straight to our discussion, and perhaps starting with you, Mr. Toumi. President Abdelmajid Tebboune described today's Algerian-Italian relations as reaching unprecedented levels. Mr. Toumi, how do you interpret this visit, especially given the timing and the current geopolitical context?
Actually, this visit, it is unprecedented, in fact, and also it comes in a particular context of geopolitics and that turmoil that is shaping the international politics, so that regional politics and both countries have constructed in the last 3 or 4 years excellent relations based on mutual respect and enhancing their bilateral relations in terms of economic cooperation and also security cooperation when it comes to the migrants question, in which this, unfortunately, this tragic conditions for those migrants has become a national security issue in which it has stability repercussions, security repercussions on both countries and in the region of SIB region as well. And this is why these two pivotal states on the Mediterranean, each country has a leverage in its geopolitics landscape. And for instance, Algeria has positioned itself well in dealing with the thorny issues on its geopolitics landscape, so that Italy, and what is interesting for the role of Italy, and coming from a prime minister or president of the council, and who comes from the right, and with this coalition of the rights, unlike we heard lately in France about the extreme right, and so she did have a doctrine that matches with pragmatism and rationality, to the point where she has become a strong voice, and her voice weigh in the EU, for instance, and entire Europe vis-à-vis the European relations on the transatlantic, in light of the tensions that were provoked between Washington and Brussels on one hand, and Europe over the Greenland. So Rome now is playing that voice of stability in Europe, and to some extent passing the level of the two pivotal European states, Germany and France. Today, Europe is Italy is fulfilling that vacuum, and that is playing interchangeable relations with the southern countries, and particularly with Algeria. And we saw that how this development and these excellent relations has become and enhanced this to the point it has become a strategic partner between Algiers and Rome, dealing with these thorny issues, whether on the migrant issues and the gas crisis that Europe is going through. So Algeria now, it is in this position to manage those relations via Italy with the European on this point.
Back to you, Mr. Scipione. From an Italian perspective, how is the visit being perceived, and what are the expectations in Rome?
Well, first of all, I say that in this visit, I think that timing is actually super important. We must not forget that this visit was actually announced last 3rd February after a phone conversation between President Abdelmajid Tebboune and Prime Minister Meloni. So weeks before the war that spread in Middle East. So what I should say here, and I would like to point out the anticipatory posture of Italy towards Algeria. And actually tomorrow, the foreign minister of Spain will be in Algeria too for another important visit 4 years after the last big visit. So the European countries are now moving towards Algeria, also because of the opportunity of gas, and particularly LNG, after we all know what happened in the Hormuz Strait, and Qatar, which is another supplier of Europe. So what will happen is, like, after this visit that at the beginning was a bilateral visit, turns to be out strategic and very important, just not just for the I would say energy issue, but for a broader perspective. So isn't just about gas, it's about a friendship that had roots in the past years, and that now is actually turning out to be even more strategic than I think even Italy and Algeria thought. So the visit was actually perceived here in Italy as very important from a gas perspective, but if you look at it from a broader point of view, it's more strategic also because of the Matei plan that you were mentioning before.
We'll perhaps speak in more details about the Matei plan. Italy is already importing nearly a third of its gas from Algeria. Contracts are set to expire around 2027, and Rome is looking both to secure short-term volumes and to establish a long-term framework for cooperation. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni referred to this in her remarks today. So, Mr. Scipione, how important is this gas partnership for Italy's energy security, especially amid those rising global tensions we have just mentioned?
Well, it's super important. After the war in Ukraine, Algeria somehow replaced the role of Russia as first supplier of gas in Italy. We don't have nuclear power plants because we had a referendum, so we actually rely a lot on North Africa but also on Algeria, I would say. To have a comparison, Italy is importing via Transmed, the so-called Enrico Mattei pipeline, 20 billion cubic meters per year, exactly, and from Libya just one. So it's as you mentioned, it's 1/3. But there is also the LNG issue. I remember that last year Italy imported 47 shipments of LNG from Algeria, which is quite a lot. Of course, it's not like Qatar, but it's still a significant part. And yes, the contract between Eni and Sonatrach on gas via Transmed will expire in 2027, and the two companies have excellent, I would say, excellent ties, and they were already discussing how to renew that. But I guess that this visit also actually marked something new on LNG shipment on the short term.
Mm-hmm. Also, the Italian Prime Minister highlighted other areas of cooperation, Mr. Toomey, particularly in renewable energy and especially green hydrogen. Does this shift toward renewable change Algeria's position and geopolitical weight in the long run, perhaps?
Actually, it is. And again, if we are in this new geopolitics context and all these developments, and those developments are going too fast. And this is why actually both countries, and Algeria and Italy, did get that early, and all these relations have been enhanced particularly in the last 4 years. But one has to remember the relations between the two countries, go get further away. During the Algerian Liberation War, and even in 16th, 70s, and 80s. And this is that's why these relations, one cannot sum it up with the energy cooperation. It is deeper than that, and it goes beyond that. Again, as I mentioned, there are these national security issues, like, for instance, the migrant issue, but they are working together to find a political solution and helping the political parties on the Libyan conflict, for instance. But now, as far as the new renewable energies and approach are part of these new forms of technologies that are developed between the two countries. And this is why we see how Algeria has initiated these programs and these projects with Italy, because Italy has a solid experience on that. And it is, and again, a possibility of a win-win position. And also this brings to to both countries, and again going after these the Mediterranean pipeline, and also speaking about another project that is going to hydrogen that is going all the way from Algeria to Germany, I mean, passing via 3 countries, the European countries. All this is a part of this new technology, and that helping the countries, the southern countries, and dealing with the northern countries, the European countries, and particularly Italy, in which is in this position that is not dealing with Algeria from the dogmatic or looking at Algeria with a dogmatic eye, is looking to Algeria with rationality and pragmatism. And this is why they are enhancing their cooperations. And this cooperation is going beyond economics, is a position, both countries are positioning themselves in that posture of the new geopolitics and the new regional order that is
going on.
Exactly,
currently.
that is going on.
Mr. Scipione, Algeria and Italy are working together to position perhaps Algeria as a major supplier of green hydrogen to Europe by 2030 through the South H2 corridor project.
Yeah, that's another very interesting project, and it's again, this visit is very timely from this point of view, because we all know that in the future, and Algeria knows this better than anyone else, we cannot rely on hydrocarbon forever because it's not enough. So betting on renewable energy, on hydrogen, on new technology, on diversification, on industrialization is again an anticipatory move. Also, I would point out that the Italian industrial system is basically small and medium enterprises. And this is exactly, I think, what the Algerian sides want to be in the near future, and also in the long future. So there are similarities. We are, in this Mediterranean Sea together, and we are binded by history. We're binded by culture. Why not to mention, for example, the next visit that the Pope, the new Pope Leo, will have in Algeria very soon. So there are many issues that we have in common, and I guess that we are in a position right now that we can say that the strategic partnership is really a win-win situation for both right now, for Italy and for Algeria.
Situation for both. Mr. Toumi, so Europe is increasingly competing for Algerian gas. That's what we read in some articles, including in Bloomberg. They said Europe is already speaking of a race for Algerian gas among European importers. And Spain wants to increase its purchases. France is watching closely, and today Italy has taken the lead. Does Algeria fully realize its strength in negotiating the position with its partners at the very moment?
And it's a part of the global Algeria's new foreign policy doctrine, and particularly when it comes to its European neighboring countries on the Mediterranean shore, and having that principle of diversifications with the partners. And this is why Algeria now has that leverage to deal with these countries' mutual interests. And again, and in light of this geopolitics and geoeconomics crisis that was caused by the ongoing war in the Middle East, so we saw how the energy parameters are very important, how are shaping geopolitics and even domestic politics. So again, Algeria has positioned itself in this posture, dealing with these imperatives of geopolitics and geoeconomics, and having the leverage, and now has the technology to deal with these issues. And this is why we see now countries, particularly the European countries now, the southern countries, and notably Spain, Portugal, France, and Italy, who are already in this incoherent policy dealing with in their own on their own ground. I mean by that, in this incoherent policy vis-a-vis the crisis with Ukraine, actually we can bring even the UK, who is also looking on having an eye toward Algeria, and all these elements in which are again the geopolitics of the world and the region now is in this turmoil, and we saw this energy crisis, and we saw those suppliers and Qatar on one hand, and after the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and also the Azerbaijan, and now Azerbaijan is cornered. So now Algeria is in this position how to work with all these countries, but not from the integral perspective, but right now from the bilateral perspective. Sure, they have this relationship with the EU when we look from the integral perspective. So, and the bilateral element is very important because both countries have, whether Algeria, Spain, or Algeria, Italy, or Algeria, France, even there's ongoing tensions between Algeria and France, but there is a possibility that will be an appeasement soon. So all this will bring, looking at Algeria, because Algeria is a stable country and is having this doctrine of diversification with its partners.
Thank you very much. Maybe briefly before we wrap up, the Mattei plan places Algeria at the center of Italy's Africa strategy. Mr. Scipione, from an Italian perspective, how does this partnership advance Rome's African strategy? Maybe briefly before we wrap up in a minute.
Well, I would say that Algeria for Italy, in the context of the Mattei plan, is the door, the door for Africa. There are some very interesting projects. I mean, one is on agriculture, for example, and it's being made by a company which is trying to make agriculture not in the middle of the desert, but more or less. So it's a very ambitious project. But also there are some other interesting projects on education, not just of course on Algeria, but on a broader perspective on several other African countries. The idea at the base of the Mattei plan is that this has to be there has to be mutual advantage, on doing this stuff. The vision of Enrico Mattei, the founder of NI, and also I would underline a friend of the Algerian Revolution. It was to break the monopoly of the so-called Seven Sisters, that were the seven big oil companies that in the 50s were dominating the world, more or less, to having a 50-50 agreement, which to me is fair. And the very core of this plan
running
is that.
Out of time, I'm afraid. Mr. Scipione, thank you very much for your participation in tonight's show. And thank you, Mr. Abdelnour. Thank you very much, and also thank you, Mr. Abdelnour, to me for your participation in Insights and Time, and thank you, viewers, for your kind attention.